The strong wind signal number 3 may be issued later tomorrow as Super Typhoon Saola moves towards the region. A fight between 2 women in a Kwun Tong health center leaves 1 dead and the other injured. And the UK's foreign secretary on a visit to Beijing. Hello and welcome to TVB News. As Super Typhoon Saola edges closer to the city, the Hong Kong Observatory has issued the standby signal number 1. The warning signal is expected to remain in force before noon tomorrow, before an upgrade to the strong wind signal number 3 later in the day. But the weather forecaster said Saola's path and intensity could still be subject to changes. Jackie Lin reports.
Today, Victoria Harbour has seen a mix of gloomy skies and sunshine. At 6 p.m., Super Typhoon Saola was about 610 kilometers east-southeast of Hong Kong. According to the present forecast track, Saola will maintain a distance of over 300 kilometers from Hong Kong tonight and tomorrow morning. Starting Friday afternoon, Saola is expected to move westward along the coast of Guangdong. The storm system will be the closest to the SAR around the early morning of Saturday and the afternoon. Meanwhile, another cyclone Hai Kui is looming around 1,000 kilometers to the east of Saola and is gaining steam. Alongside another monsoon edging closer to southern China, the weather forecaster said Saola's path and strength could still be subject to changes.
As Saola may be affected by the northeast monsoon and tropical cyclone Hai Kui thereafter, there are still uncertainties in its track and intensity. Members of the public, please take note of the latest weather forecast.
Former observatory director Sun Chi-ming said in a social media post that Saola was the most threatening storm on the South China Sea coast this year. Schools are also gearing up for the imminent typhoon before students return to classes this Friday, also when the weather is expected to start worsening. They include this primary school in the North District where emergency meetings have been held to discuss arrangements for local and cross-border students. The principal said as safety takes priority, the attendance profiles of students who can't make it to school due to the adverse weather won't be affected. Macau, meanwhile, issued the typhoon signal number 1 at 4:30 p.m., with the government having made preparations to ensure a stable food supply when Saola makes landfall. The Hong Kong Observatory said if Saola skirts past south of the city, prevailing winds are usually easterlies. That means they have a relatively stronger intensity and thus bring in even more unsettled weather to Hong Kong. Jackie Lin, TVB News.
On the mainland, authorities have issued an orange alert for the typhoon. In Taiwan, land and sea typhoon warnings are in force. In Hengshan Peninsula, rain and winds strengthened. Taiwan weather forecasters warned waves will rise as high as 8 meters. Members of the public were reminded to avoid going near the shore, but some people didn't heed the warning. Many shops at the seafood market are closed for business. In Kaohsiung, there was seawater intrusion. Residents braved the conditions and bought food as water levels reached their calves. An elderly woman died after a fight between 2 women at a community health center in Kwun Tong this afternoon. Police have arrested the other woman who was injured in the incident. Sharon Tang has more.
Following the incident, some patients were still busy making medical appointments at the lobby of the Kwun Tong Community Health Center on Hip Wo Street. Police officers arrived at the scene to carry out an investigation. They asked staff members what happened. Patients started leaving the building. The center was later closed to the public. Officers from the Regional Crime Unit and the Identification Bureau also arrived at the scene. At 3 p.m. today, a staff member of the health center reported to the police that 2 women were fighting in a washroom, one of them holding a knife. Sources say when police arrived, one cubicle inside the female washroom was locked and there were blood stains on the floor. Officers broke into the cubicle and found an 80-year-old woman unconscious with wounds on her head and face. The other woman, a 52-year-old, was conscious with injuries to her hands. Both women were rushed to United Christian Hospital for treatment. The 80-year-old woman died in the hospital. Police are investigating the cause of the incident. Sharon Tang, TVB News.
U.S. Secretary of Commerce Gina Raimondo visited Shanghai for the last leg of her 4-day visit to China. There she met with Shanghai Party Secretary Chen Jining and visited New York University's Shanghai campus, as well as the megacity's Disneyland. On Tuesday, Raimondo held talks with Premier Li Chang and Vice Premier He Lifeng and Minister of Culture and Tourism Hu Heping. She reiterated the U.S. is not seeking to decouple with Beijing, despite revealing that some American companies had claimed China has become uninvestable. Daniel Rao tells us more.
U.S. Commerce Secretary Gina Raimondo held a meeting with Shanghai Party Secretary Chen Jining today as she continued her visit to China. It came after she told reporters on a high-speed train from Beijing to Shanghai that U.S. companies had complained to her that China has become uninvestable. She said this was due to fines, raids and other actions that the American businesses claimed made it risky to do business in the world's second-largest economy. Raimondo subsequently told Chen she wanted to bring about what she called a more predictable business environment, regulatory environment and a level playing field for American businesses. Chen said stable bilateral ties in terms of trade and business are in the interest of China and the US, as well as the global community, a sentiment echoed by Raimondo. Chen also noted the high concentration of US businesses in Shanghai. Aside from talks, Raimondo visited New York University's Shanghai campus as well as the megacity's Disneyland. Prior to traveling to Shanghai, Raimondo met with Premier Li Chang and Vice Premier He Lifeng in Beijing on Tuesday. During their discussion, Li emphasized mutual respect, peaceful coexistence and win-win cooperation as the right approach for fostering positive China-US relations. The Premier urged the US to work with China to take more practical and beneficial action to maintain and develop the bilateral ties. Raimondo said the Biden administration supports China's economic development, stressing it is not seeking to decouple from Beijing. In Raimondo's meeting with the Vice Premier, He expressed concerns about measures taken by the United States, such as Section 301 tariffs, export controls against China, and two-way investment restrictions. Also on Tuesday, Minister of Culture and Tourism Hu Heping told Raimondo that Beijing hopes the United States will further increase direct flights with China and facilitate visa applications for Chinese nationals. Hu added China hoped American authorities will stop carrying out inspections of Chinese nationals and groups traveling to the United States without clear reasons. This in a bid to create better conditions for reciprocal visits by tourists. Daniel Rao, TV News.
The UK's Foreign Policy Chief James Cleverly is in Beijing for important and long-awaited talks with China's leaders. Like many Western countries, the United Kingdom and China have differing opinions on many subjects, but both sides hope dialogue will help. David Garrett reports.
British Foreign Secretary James Cleverly shaking hands with Chinese Vice President Han Zheng. It's more than 5 years since a British politician at this level came to the Chinese capital. The relationship is not currently in the best place, but it's hoped on matters of climate change and international security, some consensus can be struck. London thinks China is not doing enough to stop the war in Ukraine and has cyber security concerns. Han told Cleverly his visit will further promote the sound and stable development of bilateral relations. Han hopes for trade relations to blossom, featuring mutual respect and pragmatic cooperation. In front of the cameras, Cleverly was gracious.
Sadly, face-to-face diplomacy was disrupted right across the world because of the coronavirus pandemic. But as we discussed when you were in London, it is important that countries like ours meet and speak face-to-face on regular occasions to enhance understanding.
Cleverly took to social media to tell his followers he would not shy away from a tough conversation. It's about voicing our concerns directly, face to face. That is why I am here, he wrote on X. The Foreign Secretary was asked about this by British journalists.
Clear-eyed about the areas where we have fundamental disagreements with China, and I raise those issues when we meet. But I think it's important we also recognise that we have to have a pragmatic, sensible working relationship with China.
It's really important that
UK Prime Minister Rishi Sunak has called his country's relationship with Beijing a systemic challenge and has stressed a nuanced, non-confrontational approach is required, with the need to maintain a relationship with China essential. However, some of his own backbenchers accuse Sunak and Cleverly of kowtowing to the world's second largest economy. Cleverly insists he will talk to his counterpart Wang Yi about the human rights of Uyghurs in Xinjiang and freedom of speech in Hong Kong. Chinese policymakers will listen, but will likely say it's not the UK's concern. David Garrett, TVB News.
The boss of air traffic control in the UK says he's confident they can avoid a system failure again. 27% of flights were cancelled or delayed on Monday when a data glitch created chaos. Thousands of travelers were left stranded at airports in Britain and abroad as they waited for the fault to be repaired. The knock-on effects are still being felt, with a backlog of passengers still waiting 48 hours later. Air traffic services say an investigation is ongoing, but they're sure they've taken steps to prevent another computer malfunction. They have not commented on reports that a French airline misfiled a flight plan, causing the error. India is protesting a new Chinese map that lays claim to territory that's also claimed by India ahead of next week's Group of 20 summit in New Delhi. A map published by the Ministry of Natural Resources shows what India calls Arunachal Pradesh and the Aksai Chin Plateau within Chinese borders. Aksai Chin is a disputed plateau in the western Himalayas claimed by India but controlled by China. The timing of the protest is key, as Chinese President Xi Jinping is expected to attend the summit. An Indian External Affairs Ministry spokesman said New Delhi on Tuesday launched a formal objection through diplomatic channels with the Chinese side. The two countries have been in a 3-year military standoff over the disputed borders. Still ahead, the late boss of Russia's Wagner mercenary group is buried in St. Petersburg. In New York City, Times Square subway station is flooded after a 127-year-old water main burst. And new equipment to help the Identification Bureau of the police detect fingerprints. Welcome back. Yevgeny Prigozhin, the late head of Russia's Wagner mercenary group, was buried in a private funeral in St. Petersburg on Tuesday, 6 days after he was killed in a plane crash. Prigozhin was among 10 people who died when his private jet crashed on August 23rd, soon after taking off from Moscow en route to St. Petersburg. His death came 2 months after he launched a failed mutiny against Russia's defense ministry, which he blamed for Moscow's failures in the Ukraine war. Nazvi Karim has more.
Center of attention in life, almost an afterthought in death. Yevgeny Prigozhin, the head of the Wagner private army, was buried quietly without fanfare in a leafy cemetery outside his hometown of St. Petersburg. Reports say around 20 to 30 friends and family members attended the funeral of a man who, just 2 months ago, held sway over tens of thousands of fighters and was considered a war hero by many in Russia. The 62-year-old Prigozhin, 2 of his lieutenants and 4 bodyguards died on August 23rd when their Embraer private jet crashed minutes after takeoff from Moscow en route to St. Petersburg. The crash occurred 2 months after Prigozhin, long a critic of Russia's tactics in the war against Ukraine, launched a failed mutiny against the country's defense ministry in what Russian President Vladimir Putin described as a betrayal. An ex-convict, Prigozhin became a multimillionaire as Putin's chef via lucrative catering contracts before forming the Wagner Group and sending mercenaries to further Russian interests in places such as Syria, Libya, the Central African Republic and Mali. Prigozhin's greatest military success was in Ukraine, where his fighters captured the Donetsk city of Bakhmut after a month-long offensive that cost thousands of lives. Putin did not attend his funeral, choosing instead to meet the head of the bailiff service in Moscow. Still, in Moscow, some Wagner supporters created a makeshift shrine by laying flowers and pictures of Prigozhin and his Wagner partners. He was also remembered in Rostov-on-Don, the city Wagner occupied for 24 hours during his rebellion. For some in the West, Prigozhin was a dead man walking after the failed mutiny, with Putin blamed for his death. Moscow called the accusation an absolute lie. The Kremlin, meanwhile, has informed the Brazilian manufacturer of Prigozhin's ill-fated jet that it would not conduct a probe into the crash. Nazri Karim, TVB News.
A Chinese student at the University of North Carolina in the U.S. has been charged in connection with Monday's fatal shooting of an associate professor. Tai Lei Chi appeared in court Tuesday, where he was also charged with carrying a gun on an educational campus. A university website shows Chi is a doctoral student who joined the Victims Research Group in January 2022. Tracy Furness has more.
During a brief court hearing Tuesday, Orange County Superior Court Judge Sherry Morrell ordered 34-year-old Tai Lei Chi to remain in jail without bond, as an interpreter explained to Chi in Mandarin what was happening. Chi was charged with first-degree murder and carrying a 9mm handgun on an educational campus in the killing of Zhe Yan, an associate professor in applied physical sciences at the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill. Yan had worked at the university since 2019. Yan was the father of 2 young children and a beloved colleague, mentor and friend to many on campus, the Chancellor of the university, Kevin Gutzowitz, said in a press conference Tuesday. Authorities still have not discussed the motive for the attack. The district attorney spoke to reporters after the hearing.
The public defender did not contest a bond. How rare is that, and what does that mean?
No, I don't think that put a lot of meaning into that, because this is a stage where usually we have a certain amount of information about the case, and they have not had a chance to, they haven't received discovery from us. They haven't had a whole lot of time to speak to their client, and so it is not unusual in a case like this at this stage for them to save that argument for a later time.
The judge scheduled Chi's next court date on September 18th. Chi, who lives in Chapel Hill, where the shooting took place, was arrested during a 3-hour lockdown of the campus that followed the shooting Monday. Chi is a graduate in the Department of Applied Physical Sciences who was studying nanoparticle synthesis and light matter interaction. Tracy Furness, TVB News.
In New York City Tuesday, a 127-year-old water main broke under 40th Street and 7th Avenue, flooding 3 train tracks. The half-meter pipe gave way around 3 a.m., delivering a wet reminder of the perils of aging infrastructure beneath the city's crowded streets. The rushing water was only several centimeters deep on the street, but some social media posts showed water cascading into Times Square subway station, turning tracks into mini rivers and soaking platforms. Subway services were suspended on the affected tracks through the morning, but full service was restored by midday. New York City has about 10,900 kilometers worth of water mains, enough pipe to stretch from Times Square to Tokyo. Back here at home, the government's Identification Bureau has long offered services such as fingerprint detection for the police or other disciplinary services. To boost efficiency, the Bureau has expanded its laboratory and introduced new equipment, making it easier to detect fingerprints ruined by explosives. Sharon Tang reports.
Examiners carefully place a special potion inside a purpose-built closet that smokes evidence from a crime scene, and fingerprints on cash notes and knife magically appear. These are just some of the tasks undertaken by the Police Identification Bureau, helping to find evidence or clues to solve crime cases. After the COVID pandemic, more crimes were committed, meaning more evidence piling up. To improve efficiency, the police spent $11 million to double the size of the 20-year-old laboratory to about 4,000 square feet.
Previously, our lab is pretty small. It's about like 2,000 square feet. And we only have like 3 separate rooms to do our examinations. We have to squeeze many different tests in the single room. Now, after the renovations, now we have 8 examination rooms. So it allows we can separate all different tests in different rooms so that we can have our examiner work in the individual room more freely. We can handle more exhibit. Some of the tests you cannot conduct purely. Now we have the new equipment, then we have a chance to find fingerprints.
AI technology will also be used to enable faster fingerprint detection. New equipment is also in place to highlight fingerprints on metals that are affected by arson, explosives and gunfire. In September next year, the Bureau will have a first mobile laboratory, saving examiners the hassle of always moving equipment to various sites for examination. Sharon Tang, TVB News.
The rare blue supermoon will grace Hong Kong skies at 7:07 p.m. tomorrow night. The Hong Kong Observatory said the moon will be closest to Earth at 11:54 p.m. on Wednesday and appear biggest as a full moon at 9:36 a.m. on Thursday. On both days, the moon will appear not just brighter, but also 6% bigger than regular full moons. The lunar spectacle is called the blue moon because it's the second full moon in a single calendar month. There won't be another blue moon until May 31st, 2026. But authorities said with the approaching super typhoon Saola, the weather will be a factor in the ability of moon gazers to enjoy a perfect view. That is the news. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.